How's everybody doing? Good. This is what a person sounds like when they've been teaching for 5 days straight. So welcome to day whatever it is at NAB 2017. I'm going to take you guys through some stuff. My name is Jem Schofield, about some of my experiences using the ARRI SkyPanel and their entire system in terms of especially smaller crew production and the things that I've been using it for. But before I do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about what I kind of think of as the future production and the types of things that I do. Basically, I've had a production company for over 20 years. We do a variety of work, and then I also am an educator. So I teach the craft of video production and filmmaking. And so the types of projects that I run into and the types of things that I do on a regular basis are pretty much all over the place. We're doing a lot of talking heads, a lot of corporate work, stuff in my company in the educational field. We do commercial work, but generally on a smaller scale because we're seeing a big shift right now where budgets are decreasing, but companies want to push content to the web. So they may not be doing a commercial spot for, feature, for broadcast, but they're going to go ahead and push that stuff to those places. And then as part of my educational stuff, I'm also doing courses. I've done 2 lighting courses for LinkedIn Learning that are specifically on lighting, and then some other things that have to do, again, with small crew production in the corporate space. So, YouTube channel, website, all that normal stuff that you have to have nowadays. But really, what I want to talk to you about, which I think a lot of people are not talking about, is the ingredients that are and are needed to be considered when you're thinking about future production. Because we've got, this one thing here, which is we're making this transition from full HD to 4K and 4K plus resolutions. So we're dealing with much higher resolution in general in terms of our production, but that's just pixels. That's one little component in terms of what we have to deal with. And there are different variations of these resolutions, but I like to tell people that really resolution doesn't equal quality. You can take a small action camera, camera that's on a drone, and it can be a 4K camera. You can have a 4K camera in your pocket in a smartphone. That's just resolution. So it's all of those other things that we have to consider as content creators, which are going to have a huge impact in terms of what we do. So I made the transition from SD to HD, and I remember at NAB for many years it was the year of HD for 4 years, and then finally HD arrived. But we really are at this point now where in terms of acquisition, and largely in terms of distribution, we are pushing content out at much higher resolutions. But we're also making transitions in terms of color space and dynamic range and all of these other things. So to me, the ingredients for higher quality production, even if we're in smaller crew situations. Number one, lenses, because it's the first point of entry. It's almost the only analog component that we have now in the chain, except for audio. Camera systems are fantastic, digital camera systems now, but they're basically computer systems with a sensor block. And so we need to bring good images into those, and then we have to rely upon the camera itself and how good that camera system is in terms of what it can do to capture a good quality image. So dynamic range is a big part of that. How many stops or steps from black to white is that camera capable of capturing? And a lot of that has to do with the sensor and then how they engineer that. And of course now with digital cinema cameras, for instance, like the Alexa Mini, which I've been using a lot recently, we can get 14 plus stops of dynamic range. This is very different than standard definition and of course even high definition. When we start to, we can get those stops of dynamic range in high definition, but traditionally in terms of distributing that image, we've been looking recently at about 7 to 9 stops of dynamic range on our displays. But the cameras themselves now are capable of capturing easily double that in some cases. So we have a lot of information in terms of our blacks to whites, our luminance levels, and that means that we have a lot of data in the image. we also have to consider color space and what we call wide color gamut. And we're moving and shifting in terms of this here is really basically what we can see as humans in terms of color. And then what we're doing now is we're targeting color spaces. If you look there on the left-hand side, that smaller triangle is Rec. 709. So that's really what we're targeting in terms of our color space right now to the vast majority of displays that we're pushing content to. But if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a larger triangle there. That's what we call DCI P3, which is a larger color space that we're starting to target for some production. And then the largest triangle that you see on the left-hand side, that's Rec. 2020. So a lot of people have been hearing about that. So these are important because as we move into ultra high definition and 4K distribution, we're not only going to be capturing in a much higher dynamic range, we're also capturing a lot more color information. And that means that we need to have lighting and lighting fixtures that are able to give us what we need in terms of capturing those images. And then what we're doing is we're taking those log images or those raw images and we're processing them and then we're targeting them to these different color spaces. Again, right now, the vast majority of them are Rec. 709, but in the future, in the very near future, we are going to start to get displays, and consumers are buying displays that are supporting these expanded color spaces, higher dynamic range, and we are going to have to think about all of that stuff in terms of content creators. And we have to do it sometimes with crews of 1 to, if we're lucky, 8 people. Most of the time, 1 to 3 people. And I think that as an educator, I'm seeing that that's very true in pretty much all of these different situations. So to me, as I said, the last key ingredient is really lighting. If we don't have light, then we're not producing an image. And we have to have good quality fixtures. And I think the advantage that we've seen over the last few years is the evolution of lighting has trended with also where we're going in terms of how we're capturing images. Meaning that when we go from an HD resolution and now we're capturing for ultra high definition 4 times the amount of pixels and we're displaying those, we are going to see a lot more in that image, and that's going to affect the way that we approach lighting. So we're also seeing trends, of course, and have for a long time, where we now have access to, even on the low end, within a few $100s, large sensor camera systems. So we can approach and think about creating more cinematic images as long as we have the tools that are available to us to do that kind of stuff. So I've actually been using the SkyPanels for quite a while now. One of the huge advantages to me is just how fast they are in terms of being able to use them. They're also built extremely well. So I always talk about, as a teacher, the difference between what I would consider an owner-operator light and a rental-worthy fixture, something that can go in and out of a truck all of the time, can be used for, production day in and day out without being pampered or babied. It's designed for real-world production, and this is very much a series of lights that can give you that in terms of what you're doing. And they do come in 3 sizes. They have the S30, there's a 60, which is twice the size, twice the output, and then there's a larger fixture, which is the 120, which you can see at ARRI's booth, which has the same output as the 60, but it's twice the length. So it's great for certain types of productions, either in a horizontal or in a vertical type of position. I did a series of commercials back at the end of last year, and we used the SkyPanel lights for that. I actually used this particular fixture because that was what was available to us. And we shot, and this is typical of now, it's crazy, we shot 4 commercials in 2 days. They were being created for an electronics company, and it was content for CES. So they wanted it for CES, and they wanted it in an environment just like this, in this hall, basically. And then they were going to put that content up on the web as these short commercial spots, Instagram versions, all of that kind of stuff. So you can imagine that their budgets aren't going to be the same as if you're doing something for a large electronics company and they're going to be airing an ad for the Super Bowl. So that's the SkyPanel S30. We're just pushing it through. It's already a soft fixture in terms of the type of light that it produces, but we're pushing it through a 6x6 fabric here and through a frame just to soften that light even more and to create a larger source. And then we also shot in a second location, which was a gym in Brooklyn. And in that location, we're using that light in a couple of different ways. You'll see it up there on the right on the stand, and we're using it there to create a little bit of a harder light source. And there's a modifier that's made for the SkyPanel. It's called the intensifier. And when you put that onto the light in this position, and let me just turn this down a little bit, you will see that these are the panels, and they come out, and when you put the intensifier panel on here, it will give you 50% more output out of there because it changes the angle of the beam, basically, of the light, so it's a more focused light, and we were using that to create a harder light source over there. Then we moved it to a different location in that small space. We used it one way here, a little bit more of a harder source, and then we turned it around and we started to use it as a softer source, and we started to push it through an additional frame to create a bigger light. For its size, there is a tremendous amount of output in this light, and I've been using this light and also the S60C in a lot of different productions now together, and it's really just about scaling when your space gets larger, you have to just basically scale your modifiers and what you're doing. So if I'm in a larger space, then I'm going to reach for a 60. If I'm in a smaller space, and I can use the 30 in most situations, especially in sort of traditional corporate production. We're also seeing a huge trend today in terms of in-house production. So a lot of people are building departments within their companies that are creating lots and lots of content. And I found myself going and doing training in those different environments, and it's very oftentimes that they shoot content at the actual companies themselves. So it's an office, you have cubicles or maybe an open concept. The office building is surrounded by windows, and they want to go around and just shoot content within that environment all of the time. And what's great about the SkyPanels is not only are they completely color tunable, and we'll take a look at some of those features in a minute, they have high outputs. And so we can take situations where we have a lot of daylight, a lot of ambient light, and with something like the S60, you can move around very quickly in that type of environment. You're already dealing with a soft source, so you can use it. It has a lot of surface area, and then you can modify it and make it even larger. And you can actually shoot something with somebody sitting next to a window and still see out of that window because you have enough compensation. You can get your ratios to where you need them to be overall. So also the color aspect of it, being able to tune specific colors, and I think we're starting to see here that the advantages of things like RGBW, where we have red, green, blue, and white LEDs inside of a fixture, give you a lot more in terms of creativity when you're doing things. And this then goes back to that whole subject of color and just making sure that you're thinking about that when you are working in your productions. So that larger spectrum there, we were talking about that earlier on, and then being able to produce a quality of light that's going to match the types of cameras and the types of images that we are getting out of these camera systems overall. So what I want to do is just kind of take you through a little bit about the SkyPanel and some of the features. We actually have the latest firmware on here, which was just released, I think, well, at the beginning of the show, Monday, and here we are on Wednesday. So it's not, some of the new stuff is not stuff that I've used in the production environment yet, but it's really, really great stuff that just takes a lighting fixture that I've been using in a lot of different ways to a whole different level. So I'm going to take you guys through that so you can see it. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the different modes in here. And now with firmware 3.0, we have additional modes. And we can just easily cycle through those by hitting the mode button, and you'll see those here. And the first mode is a correlated color temperature. So this is basically taking advantage of those RGBW LEDs. And what we can do is if I just increase the output here so you can see some light, I can go in and I can dial in very specifically 2800 all the way up to 10,000 Kelvin. And then very importantly for me, in terms of fast production in small crew environments, the ability to dial in a plus and also minus green, because when we're going into production environments now, mixed lighting is the norm. Because people can go in an office environment, they walk into a home improvement store, and the access that they have to lighting is all over the place. They're not educated on what those different color temperatures are, so they just pick up a fluorescent bulb, or another compact fluorescent, or they say, oh, we're going to just take the 3 lights that went out in our office and we'll replace them with some LEDs. But they don't look at what color those are. So you walk in there and you have mixtures of daylight, and you have older fixtures and newer fixtures, and then very oftentimes, because of the quality of those practical lights, we also see that those lights are skewing a little bit green or a little bit magenta. So using a color meter, if we can, in an environment, we can take a reading of that and we can see where that is, and then very easily just dial a plus or minus green so that we're matching that. This makes life so much easier in post-production, and it also takes out that component of having to sit there and gel all of your fixtures or do certain things that really are not what we can do in a lot of these smaller crew environments. The second mode that we have is hue, saturation, and intensity. And basically, we have full control over that. Still have the amount of output that's coming out of there. We have a 360-degree hue wheel. And then we can dial in how much saturation of that particular color is going into our image. So there's a tremendous amount of control here. And for us, when we're using let's say a 60 as a key source, we might take the 30 and we might use the HSI mode for a background light, so we can create a little bit of separation. And one of the things that I tell everybody who goes out there and they say, we need a studio with a white cyc, or let's go ahead and get a white backdrop, and we'll go ahead and just light that and give it some sort of color, because a lot of people will do that. They'll take a tungsten or a daylight fixture and they'll throw gels on that. Don't do that. Go and get yourself, or make sure that that cyc is painted a neutral middle gray, an 18% gray, because when you take this feature, these colors, and you put that onto a middle gray, then it will take any of those colors. So that gray will then become blue, it'll become red, it'll become green, it'll become whatever color you want. So having this control is really fantastic. This is a feature that I use sometimes where I want to create a warm-cool contrast. So I might go ahead and I'll just switch back over to, and by the way, it has great memory in here, so when you switch between the modes, it doesn't reset itself, it'll stay where it was before. So if I go back to CCT, and let's say I was shooting with a tungsten light for my key, then what I could do is take a second fixture and go into HSI, and then I could create maybe a little bit of a contrast there, a warm, cool contrast, which looks really nice when you're doing things. The third mode that we have, which was the thing that really attracted me to SkyPanel to begin with, because we have a lot of bicolor fixtures that are out there on the market, is the gel mode. And inside of here, we have 300 and I think it's 18. It's over 300 gels from both Roscoe and Lee. So these are industry standard gels, and what they're doing is they've gone in here, and by the way, all of these fixtures are calibrated. So if you're used to using any of the L series Fresnels from ARRI, these are, especially when you're in the CCT and the HSI mode, they are calibrated so that all of those lights match in production, which is actually what we did recently. I'll talk about that in a minute. But here are the Roscoe gels, and we can cycle through, and then we can switch over to Lee gels, and we have different series, cosmetic, 600 series, 700 series, color filter, color correction. And when you're using this, for instance, let's say I'm in color correction, and I want to go ahead and put in a full CTB or whatever, a double CTB, and I put that in there, I can apply that gel to either a 3200 or a 5600 Kelvin light. So it's as if you put a fixture up there that was tungsten or a fixture that was daylight, and then you're going in and you're going to go ahead and take those standard Roscoe or Lee gels and you're going to put them in front of there. And that's amazing. It's really amazing because if you try to gel a traditional LED fixture, it doesn't gel well. If you take a daylight LED and you put a CTO on there and you want to get it over to a tungsten color temperature, just doesn't really work very well. I've never had good success taking an LED fixture and taking a traditional physical gel and putting it in front of there and getting the same quality of light that I would get that if I threw up an HMI and I put a CTO on there. It just doesn't work the same way. So the fact that you're getting a calibrated, consistent color that matches those gels in a fixture like this is fantastic. And there's a lot of gaffers, there's a lot of people who light, who are used to using specific gels. So if you want bastard amber, it's in here. If you want to go in here and apply CTOs and you want to apply CTBs, it's in here. If you want cosmetic gels, they're in there. And that's, for us, really fantastic. If I want a straw and I want to just create that certain time of day, instead of sitting there and futzing with the color temperature, I can just go ahead and do that. And now they've taken that a step further. And I've only had my hands on this new stuff for a very short period of time, but I do want to show it to you. So let me swing this around a little, and I'll just so you can see what's happening with the light, and then I'll turn it back so that they can see it with that little white camera over there. So I'm switching over here now to this next mode here, where basically I go in, and they have an entire library, 46, I believe, of matching different types of light. So this would match what a traditional Christmas light would look like. Sounds crazy, but if you were shooting in that environment, you could. A warm antique bulb. Let me spin this around for you to see. This is an antique bulb that's halogen, incandescent, tungsten bulb. So these are all now built in, and these are just the incandescent presets inside of the light. Then I can switch that over. Now we have discharge. So we have, and we're matching here, an HMI. And then high pressure sodium. That's mercury vapor. Ceramic. Xenon. So we have all of that stuff. And then we have other, and this is gas fire, mobile phone, computer monitor. So think about that in terms of small crew production. You walk into an environment and you want to light a scene, and you put talent down at a desk, and they're being lit partially with a computer monitor, which is generally calibrated to a D65, in terms of its white point. And then you just go into SkyPanel and you say, let's match that. So you go into this library and it's already there. So that's really, to me, again, fantastic feature in terms of quick and easy production. Well, production's never easy, but faster production. And then we also, so then you can go in here and then you can actually increase the intensity of those sources. You can even, just modify all of that stuff. So that's your other mode. And then we have RGBW control. So if you just want to go into the light now and you want to take each one of those diodes that's on inside of the light and you want to control them individually, you can just change what percentage you want those red, green, blue, and white LEDs to be. So that gives you a ridiculous amount of control overall in terms of the light. Now we're going to go into the menu, and there are a lot of different options, but the big one for me, which was added along with those other modes that we just took a look at, were the lighting effects. And inside of here are a slew of new lighting effects which you can use for specialty applications. So instead of having a flicker box and going in there and trying to simulate these things, they've built those into the fixtures. We actually did the firmware update to this particular light, which was on 2.0, right before we started the class. It's a USB stick. You just plug it in, turn on the light. It updated in about 3 minutes, and we're on firmware 3.0. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those. So let's give me, can do cop car. So you can see here, that's a cop car based on a blue light, okay? And then I can switch that. There's blue and white, red, blue, and white, because in different parts of the world, they're using different colored lights. So if you're doing production in Europe, then you might choose something different than somewhere else. That's a single, and then we can go through here. That's a quint, and then that's quintal. We've got a double light. And let me just dim this down for you so you can sort of see what this looks like overall. You should be able to see it. Let me turn this up a little. Okay. Do you see how it's doing that inside the light? It's pretty awesome. So you have a lot of control in terms of what you can do. And then if I just back out of there and we just take a look at some of the other ones, we've got light strobe, fireworks, lightning, television, to me a big one, because a lot of the times, and then you can even set it up where is it a warmer or cooler television, what's the speed that that's being done in, so you have a tremendous amount of control in terms of what you can do with these different effects to simulate them. They have fire in here. The fire effect is great because it's completely randomized, so you're not getting a pattern that repeats itself over time, so when you want to simulate that stuff, you can. And then they're just going to go in here and we just turn off those lighting effects, and there you go. So I'm going to actually talk to you about one other thing. I'm going to bring up a project that we just recently shot, and I'm just going to back out of here, and let's see if we've got it up here. So this project was a project that we shot in Burbank about 2 weeks ago. The person who's sitting in this chair is obviously me, but the actual person, which I can't put up here because we're in the B&H booth, was Billy Bob Thornton, and we were shooting a promo for a company. So we went into a sound stage and we set it up, and we are using the S60 version of this light, and I encourage you to go over to the ARRI booth to take a look at it with the Chimera modifier. We are actually using the shallow modifier, which is a 3x4. It's absolutely beautiful, and we don't have to mount these lights just horizontally. When we get to the 60, we were actually using it in a vertical position, so we're creating a nice big key source, brought it in really nice and close, really beautiful wrap light. We didn't have to set up other stands, we weren't building other modifiers, so that was our main key. And then we just pushed the 30, and we pushed that through a 4x, and then that was giving us the control to just dial up our fill a little bit. And then we actually used 2 L7Cs, which are the Fresnel versions of the LEDs that ARRI makes, and we were using those. And if we kind of take a look, I'm just going to put basically a LUT on here, and we were using those to just create this sort of atmosphere that we're seeing over here in the back of the frame. And it was great. I mean, we had this really nice soft source over here. We could dial in some stuff. We had a little bit of a kicker coming in on the side, and then it obviously looks a lot more interesting when Billy Bob Thornton's sitting inside of the frame. But it was pretty tremendous because we found that because we basically only had a swing, so it was myself and there was a camera operator, and then there was a swing who was basically grip electric, and we were plugging into power strips. You know, we can actually, this is just amazing that we can just, on a 10 amp circuit, we can just go ahead and plug these lights in. The amount of output is absolutely insane. And sometimes we actually take the S60 and we put the antenna on it, and we're getting 50% more output on that light, and it's just incredible what you can get out of the system. So I'm just finding that for me, that the speed in which we can work and the quality of light that we're getting, because we're seeing that, and this was it's shot on the Alexa Mini, so you're also taking that color science and all that great stuff that comes with that camera system and matching it, has just made our lives so much easier to be able to do that. And we weren't even using these new features inside of there. How often am I going to use a cop car? Well, if I'm shooting a narrative, maybe quite often. Fire, television, things like that. But in the corporate world, if we can walk into an environment and we can match the lighting that is in that environment, that mobile phone or that computer option, that just makes things go so much faster. Any questions that you guys have before my timer runs out here at the B&H stage? Anything at all? Okay. So what I'm going to do, because there will be another presenter that's going to come up in about 15 minutes, is I'm just going to break this stuff down, and then I'll make myself available if you want to have any questions at all, and I'm happy to talk to you guys about that. Thank you very much.